Welcome to the Awarenezzz podcast. In today's episode, we had the chance to speak with Mike Brown. Mike is the head of performance at Strength and Performance Training and has had experience at both the private sector and the academy sector, working at Cincinnati FC. In today's episode, we spoke about everything on how a young athlete should train outside of the field. Not only the importance of it, but then also how to do it. How to train speed, how to train power, how to train agility, how to train strength. Specific exercises and variables that every young athlete can look at this podcast and go ahead and do it to increase their performance. So again, if you're a young athlete that's trying to increase your performance, then this episode is perfect for you. It has the specifics on how to train and why to train that way. I hope you guys enjoy it.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to a new episode of the Awarenezzz podcast. Today we are here with our guest, Mike Brown. Thank you very much for being with us and introduce yourself to the people.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Brown, and I'm currently the Director of Performance for Strength and Performance Training in Fairfax, Virginia. I've just started this role back in January, and I've just completed 30 days, and it has been such an awesome ride. I'm excited to get everything going and excited to be with you all today.
Of course, Mike. Well, thank you very much as well for being here, man. And kind of like, I know right now you're in strength and performance training, but you've been some time in the performance sector, in the youth sector, both in the academy level, but also the private sector as well now. But tell us a little bit of what got you into that sport professional part. What made you go that way?
Yeah, it all started when I was training in high school. So really just found the love for training when I was going to the gym constantly and training for my sport, track and field back in high school, and even soccer. So I found that the gym was a great tool, resource just to get me better and really improve my body composition and, more importantly, improve my performance. So I was there all the time with my coach, Jim Griffin, at the time, and we got after it all the time. And all those days just really built up my character and more so just getting after it all the time. So
basically experiencing the importance and the impact that those sessions in the gym, that gym work, that extra work got into you, and then you just wanted to like do it for the other guys, like be the guy that's actually telling them what to do, right?
100%. So he was a great role model for me back then. And he just showed me that he was not only one of the smartest people that I knew at that time, but he also showed me such a great and fun environment that the weight room and even on the field could be. It could be just such an awesome environment that you could do all the time as a profession. So at that moment, when I was going into college at the community college level in New Jersey at Raritan Valley, I originally thought that was going to be a physical therapist, but I realized really quick that actually, no, I want to take my career in performance and I wanted to be a coach instead of that physical therapy or physical therapist practitioner. So instead, I wanted to take it into a different direction. And once I transferred my credits to Temple University and I met Anthony Skurza, he introduced me to strength and conditioning more so. And there are a lot of different options. So in strength and conditioning, we all know there are so many different fields. Aside from team sport, there's private sector, tactical, which is, in my opinion, underrated. Team sport, as we already know, the college sector, etc. So he introduced me to all those different possibilities, and I gave all of them a shot with going to Reach Your Potential training back in 2019. And then I got back to Temple University and did Olympic sports and football. And then I had the opportunity to go to MSU Denver, worked with Isaiah Casieja and Jordan Ulrich at that time when they ran the program. And that was during COVID. During COVID, when things were just shaky.
Yeah.
If you tested positive for COVID, then you pretty much had to isolate yourself. It was a scary time without the vaccine, but it was a very memorable experience. And we'll touch upon that later, but would not take that away whatsoever. Those days really built me up to who I am today. And then I got to go to University of Minnesota with Cal Dietz. And last but not least, basically got to Temple University back there as a graduate assistant. So
I see. And I found it very interesting of how you remember so vividly that first coach that you had that made you fall in love with strength and conditioning, and how the importance of a coach in a young athlete environment, as it can make the experience of you going to the gym one of the best things ever, and it can make it also miserable. In your case, thank God, it made it one of the best things, and it even made you realize, okay, this is actually what I want to do. But then in other cases, there might be guys that end up hating the gym. It can be because, I mean, sometimes it can be their mindset, but I do think there's a pretty big role that the coach plays into it. So the fact that you remember every coach that you worked with, that one specifically that got you into strength and conditioning, I just think is very important. And I imagine that's something that you wanna keep doing now that you're the coach, to have kids remember the gym in the right way as you did when you were younger.
yeah, and it's the most important thing to make the gym, or when we're on the field or on the court, make it as fun as we possibly can. Make it an environment where it's welcoming, make it an environment where they're getting after it, they're competing, they're associating that environment with a good time, but also at the same time having a good balance of not only just fun, but also having that good work ethic and just really having purposeful intent with everything that they're doing. And that's something that we could talk about later. Having great intent matters, but also at the same time, got to make it a fun environment, make the big time where you're at.
Yeah.
And go from there.
Yeah, and now that we're talking about it, I think it's a good transition to just start talking about that weight room session, that strength and conditioning session. What is the importance of it, apart from just sport-specific training? What's the importance of having that extra session in which you go to the gym, you train your strength, both physically and then also, as you mentioned, those other aspects of it?
Yeah, the importance of that is we have to use that as a vehicle to train the physical qualities that we have. So weight room, you guessed it, we have weights in there, so we can build up the capacity for building strength and power. Can we do that on the field? Sure, you can do it with principles, doing tempos, doing body weight calisthenics. You could totally do it, but the weight room is probably an arguably even better tool because we have the resources available. So really good tool for us to use in terms of, like, we have pull-up bars, we have dumbbells, et cetera, et cetera. So such an important tool that you can really utilize. And we've learned in my career that, or we probably learned across our careers, that probably only need about 30 minutes, maybe 45, but you could get it done in 30 minutes and just get really good quality sessions in if you're selecting 6 to 8 movements of your choice and just making sure that you get the most out of that session. And you don't need to go super crazy with it. Simple always gets it done, guys.
And
I like that call up. Oh,
you mentioned the way a little bit about how the session is structured, right? And something that we just came out of, I mean, especially in soccer, the off season, right? So we just came off the off season, and people see the off season as one of the main chances for you to train that gym, especially because the tight schedule and everything. Just wanted to ask you, now that you're talking about reps, exercises, how should an athlete train in the off season, and how should they approach it to make the best out of it, considering these weight room sessions?
Of course. So if we're just talking about off season, we want to first analyze where the athlete is at, do like a little assessment, see where they're at, make a needs analysis, look at where they're at with their sport, look at where they're at with their development, and everybody's going to be different. So take them through a series of testing batteries that you have, whatever you possibly have. If you have a vert tech, if you have a jump mat, then get their explosive ability, measure their vertical jumps. If you have a measuring tape, brilliant. Then you could do a broad jump, get their horizontal ability to jump. If you have a stopwatch, awesome. You can test how fast they can run. If you have timing gates, even better, because sometimes the stopwatch is maybe unreliable. I don't know about you guys, but maybe The trigger on my finger, not the best, but at the same time, we make it work and we do the best that we can with the resources and tools that we have. So just creating a nice little profile, make sure that we're building the best athlete possible, but also just seeing where they're at based on their age, baselines, and all of that. So continuing on, once we get some of those numbers off of like their plyometric ability, their speed and agility, then let's get some strength numbers. It could be as simple as many as possible push-ups. Maybe you do as long as possible chin up or pull up hold, or as many as possible pull up and chin up, depending on what you want to do. Or you can make it more objective if you have the tools available with a 3-rep max bench press, 3-rep max squat, making sure that the tools that you have are going to meet everything that you need to get done. So
having a testing phase first and seeing what needs to be improved of. And also like how important or like how much do you look at past injuries so the player can prepare for the next season to be ready?
Yeah, always have to take that into consideration too. That's one of the first things that we always discuss too. What was your injury history? What's your history in general? What are your goals? You need to understand, like, all right, we need to drive the training in the right way. Do we have 6 to 8 weeks? Do we have 12? If we have longer, awesome. If we have shorter, not a problem. We could get stuff done. Just need to be realistic about how much time do we have and how do we maximize the time that we have with these athletes. And so in my setting currently, we have about 60 minutes to get the most out of the sessions possible. And so the buckets that we're going to do the best that we can to fill up, definitely prioritizing like a solid session prep, really good plyometric speed and agility section, and then finish off with 2 strength blocks. Because with our youth athletes, they need to get stronger. They need to get more powerful and faster. And so those are the things that we would prioritize if we had 60 minutes. If we had longer, then maybe we could sprinkle in a bit more speed and agility, maybe more energy system development. All of those things are so important, but have to take into consideration what are your constraints. And so if you guys come across a resource, Jamie Pasquin actually wrote a really good piece. I think it's called the Gauntlet Performance Book. But in that book, he talked about what are your constraints in your environment. You need to identify that first. What equipment do you have available? How much time do you have? Time is probably the most important resource. And so finding ways to maximize the time and organize it in a way where you're getting the most out of that session.
Yeah, I see. And you mentioned like, okay, you first do this assessment, and then of course, based on this assessment and of course the constraints that you have, that's where you plan the session. And just for any guy watching that might be thinking, okay, but how do I train? Let's say, I don't know, let's put a scenario in which you get a guy that has a good amount of speed, strength is not so much, but then he's lacking a little bit of technique, right? His movement patterns aren't the best. What would you do in this case, and how would you increase those movement patterns and at the same time maximizing that strength that you can get considering your constraints?
Teach them how to move. You can use tempos as a tool, slow down the movement. And so what I mean by that is, let's take a squat, for example, or a push-up. What I've seen in my experience, and I would think other coaches would agree, is that younger kids, some of them just are not good at push-ups. And so you can literally use that as a great tool first. You can prescribe tempos with that. 2 seconds on the way down with a 2-second pause and then go up. That's what I'm doing with my female athletes with our volleyball group. And it's been working really well. But then some of them say, oh, I can't get up from this position. And that's the other thing too. When I hear that they can't, we don't like to hear that, because this is the other thing too. We want to reinforce positive thinking. It's so important in the space. Not every day is going to be positive, but at the same time, if you're already telling yourself you can't, then you're already setting yourself up for failure. You're setting yourself up for limiting yourself and limiting your growth. And so going back to the topic, slow down the movement, focus on owning the positions, getting down in a deeper range of motion instead of like the half Z's, push-ups, whatever. If they're doing the ones where you're looking like a worm, then we got to slow it down and just own the positions.
Mm.
So going for the eccentrics, using that as a tool to teach them really good movement and just own the positions.
Yeah, so it's because I can also talk from experience. When I was like younger, I would rather just do 10 very bad technique push-ups than doing 2 with very slow technique and doing it the right way just because of my ego, right? So how do you manage, like in this moment, do you still want to get a bit of strength, or do you just want to focus first on getting the right movement patterns in, and then you can focus on loading a little bit more? How do you balance those, that strength development, that skill development, and then that also the enhancing that movement pattern?
Master the movement patterns first, but at
Okay.
the same time, when they come in we just had a volleyball group come in for an assessment, and we did test their ability to do push-ups. Let's see how many you could get in a row, having that blue pad right underneath, touch your chest to the pad and come up, get a full extension at the top, see how many they could get. And we record, rank, and publish, and just keep track of where they're at so we're able to track their progress. Another thing that you could do too, videotape them too, and then keep them in your library as well. And then we could track that over time and just say, hey, remember when you looked like a worm? Look at you now, looking really good with this. So just use all the tools that you can, whether it's an Excel or Google spreadsheet, or if you have the ability to have the API, meaning like the ability to put it in an athlete management system, go from there and just make that whole system work.
Yeah, I see. Because a lot of the times as young athletes, we want just to feel that we're getting better. So if we cannot necessarily do it in terms of the strength that we're gaining, like we cannot see it in the weight that we're using, at least having some way for us to know that we're progressing. And this, in this case, will be looking at how our technique we used to look like before and how it is looking like, right? Is that basically what you mean there?
100%.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Perfect. And Mike, I wanted to ask you, because I mean, yeah, you got anything, Matt?
I have one more question, but you can.
No, so just wanted to ask you now, kind of like switching up a little bit. I mean, not switching up that much, but in terms of speed and agility, like every sport involves some level of speed. It needs some level of change of direction. So I wanted to ask you, how do you train that uh, as a youth performance coach, right? Do you let that just to the sport specific part and let them develop it? Or how do you train it outside of the field, considering that your time might be limited and you want to be a little bit more cognizant about what you're doing in the weight room?
What an excellent question. So we talk about sport specific. And so let's talk about that real quick. In terms of breaking down the movement that they do in their sport, that's sport specificity. And that's where we go from there as strength and conditioning professionals. Now, do we do things with the ball? In my opinion, this is just me, and I think other coaches would agree as well. I'm going to leave that up to the sport coaches. If you want to get better at volleyball, if you want to get better at soccer, hire a professional soccer or volleyball coach. So we've been working with these coaches for a long time, and some of the parents do ask me, oh, do you do sport specific position work with these athletes? And I tell them, no, that's not our specialty. Coach Bobby Smith just talked about this over an Instagram reel. I believe that he talked in Italy when he presented on how he does his system at Reach Your Potential training, and he nailed it completely when he talked about making sure that you're just training the basics well, and that the sport specificity aspect, we're just breaking down the movements, whether it's lateral speed, linear speed, crossover abilities, etc. And so those are the things that we are really going to master first, instead of just like, oh yeah, let's just have you run with the ball and let's just talk about your dribbling ability. That's not really our lane, in my opinion. And so we want to make sure that we're just breaking down the movement and just getting those things fundamentally right. And so we talk about how much time do we have with them. Let's select a couple of movements that will give us the most bang for our buck. And so if we're talking about developing speed, then let's just choose maybe 2. We're talking about improving your acceleration, linear ability, then maybe a half kneel sprint out is really good, and have them compete with each other, whether it's a chase or whether it's just 1-on-1 or 3-1, whatever the case can be. Just have them all on the line and just go, and let's see who gets there first. What I like to do a lot of times, I like to make teams. And so by having teams, we just keep score, just have them sprint out about 10 yards. You're going to get a lot of good intent.
I see.
But if you just tell them like, oh yeah, just go sprint 10 yards at like 90%, sure, some of them can understand it, but at the same time, you're definitely going to get more intent once you make it a competition, or even better, you time it. So this is another tool that you can use. We talked about the ability of having a stopwatch or the ability of having timing gates, whether you use Dasher, Bald, Brower, whatever tool that you have available to you, use it to the best of your ability and sprinkle it into your sessions. So you're able to track it over time, rank, record, publish, and just show your athletes where they're at, but also just get the most out of training as you can.
I see. And you mentioned a very important component there of competition, or having something that you're chasing, even if it's a number or if it's a teammate or if it's just somebody that's training with you, right? What role does that competition, or does that aiming for something has in the training? I just think it's a very important topic.
We want to make the big time where we're at. We want to prepare them for the moment of sport where they're actually going to compete. These people are athletes. They naturally want to compete. They want to naturally have fun. And so if we're just telling them like, oh yeah, just do these A skips and do all these rudimentary drills, they do have a purpose for sure. And sometimes you do need to slow it down and clean up those mechanics. Definitely do. That's something that we ultimately do with our session preps. We do take a little bit of time to talk about some mechanical focuses. So if we're talking about linear speed development, we'll teach them the ankling abilities. We'll teach them how to skip. Believe it or not, guys, youth athletes in this day and age, they struggle with just the simple things, skipping, knowing how to jump. So I think they're just sitting too much. They're on their phones too much. They're on their tablets or iPad kids. So just got to give them abilities to just play, give them abilities to just like do the simple things, skip, run, etc. So we just teach them, okay, this is how you skip, break it down, and just go from there.
Okay. And let's say an athlete, like as you just mentioned, right now you're seeing more struggles, especially in that mechanic part, and in getting those movements dialed in. How do you start, let's say, with a guy that doesn't know how to skip properly, and how do you progress them to then actually develop their speed or their agility?
Like I said before, break it down slowly. So if we see that let's just say, okay, I want you to do an A skip in place, and they're trying to do a high knee in place instead. We just say stop, and then we just break it down. Do it really slow at first. Be patient as a practitioner, and just teach them the pattern. Give them a cadence. Problem solve with them. Figure out what language is going to work for them, but be really quick with them because you have 60 minutes. Right. So do the best that we can. Is it going to be perfect the first time? That's our goal, but it's okay if it's not. If they progress, that's a win. They get any kind of progress, big win, because we have to remember with our program too, if it's about 12 to 16 weeks or 8 weeks, we have more time left. And so if we're making progress within that session, awesome.
I see.
Okay.
I see. And you go, Madsen.
Or you talk about the importance of mechanics, especially for young guys. Let's say you're a 15-year-old client and he's in off season now. How would you structure agility or speed session for him?
So for what athlete did you say?
for like a 15-year-old, he's off season and he plays soccer.
Perfect. So if it's 2 days a week, then we can do one day is linear speed, the other day reaction, multiple direction work. So that's just an example. And then that would be to focus on the plyometric days, speed and agility focus. And on those 2 days as well, it depends on what they want out of the session. And so if the aim is to increase their speed and focus on those certain elements, and they'll have 30 minutes with us, then we're going to focus on developing their speed. But if they want to focus on getting stronger, faster, powerful, we're going to start off with a really good session prep, plyometrics, speed and agility, and then end off with 2 blocks of strength. This is just for like a youth athlete. So what that can look like is day 1, linear speed, focus on those mechanics, focus on doing timed runs, accelerations, whatever the case can be, eventually get to max velocity. So we go short to long. And what that looks like is those runs at first can be about 10-yard increments of accelerating out from a position where they're slowing down. So they're coming out of a push-up, a half kneel position, instead of just saying, all right, you're tall, just run. Because if it's the first week, then we want to just make sure that we're being as safe as we possibly can. And this is something that, trying to think, but this is something that we've talked about with some of the resources and the books that we've read over time, is that we go from short to long with Charlie Francis. So Charlie Francis has talked about these concepts, going from short to long and just going 10 yards first, going maybe 15, then maybe 20, but just gradually building up that engine. So we're starting on the ground and then we're going up.
I think that's great, because a lot of people might think just speed running is just making them run. Speed training is just making them run. And I mean, there's a lot to it, and there's just multiple components to that speed and agility part. You have the change of direction, you have the accelerating part, you have the decelerating part. So I just think that the way you broke it down is great. And now transitioning from speed and agility, I want to go to also 2 other components of the performance part of an athlete, and those are strength and power. I mean, you mentioned how every training is tailored to the specific athlete. So I wanted to ask you how you blend that strength and power into these sessions, and if you do it for every athlete, like, does every athlete needs to have some component of strength and power, or is that a later progression that only the most advanced ones can do? How do you put strength and power into the training?
So for sure, when we're doing the long-term athletic development paradigm, I think we need to touch on every quality. They need to be exposed to as many things as we possibly can, as many movement patterns as we can. Joel Smith, really good resource as well, with Elastic Essentials, just talking about breaking up the rudimentary routines of just exploring different movement patterns, having them do single leg variations, single leg landings, rotational jumps, even just talking about sprinting and doing curve runs, etc. We want to expose them to as many of those different movement patterns as we possibly can, but also just teach them the principles of movement. How do you land? And we talk about deceleration too. How do you land from disadvantageous positions? The principle of play is land like an athlete, core squat position, whether it's single leg, split stance, double leg, whatever the case may be. Teach them the overall principle, because a lot of times in sport, you're going to see them take off single leg, like Cristiano Ronaldo could jump off pretty nice. All right. So just introducing them to those different options, different tools. So yeah, you can continue to just program in just regular double leg jumps, but single leg jumps are really good too. So give them options to explore, but also teach them as many things as you can possible.
Okay, so the strength aspect also comes with exposing them to as many movement patterns as possible, of course, to enhance their movement. And now let's say we want to like actually develop their strength as well, the same way you did with the speed session, which I thought it was nice. How would you structure the strength session of a young athlete? You always mention you try to put at least 2 blocks in there
Yeah.
at the end of a session. Just talk me a little bit about those 2 blocks. What type of movements do they have, and what type of variables do you use depending on the athlete?
So it can be broken down into 2 or 3, depends on the amount of time that you have. Let's just say you have 30 minutes. Less is more for sure. And so what we mean by that, Pat Livesey, back in 2019 when I was at Reach Your Potential training, had this conversation, thankfully early on. Less is more. And what we mean by that is choose the movements that will give you the most bang for your buck. And even Zach Roth back at Temple talked to me about this too. Choose these movements that will give you the most bang for your buck and won't waste too much of your time. So quad extension, we can argue, is a great exercise, but is it going to give you the most bang for your buck in terms of targeting many different muscle groups? No, because it's a quad extension. So we want to target a lot of different muscles. So a squat is really good option. But let's talk about the structure of the 2 block. So right now we have volleyball group. So what that can look like is in your A block, we can have a dumbbell push press paired off with a vertical jump variation. And then the next one could be a core movement of your choice. And then you can have a pull variation, whether that's a horizontal pull like a TRX row or a cable row, whatever you have in your facility that will allow you for a good flow. And a good flow is so important. If you don't have flow, you don't have anything. Got to
Yeah.
make sure that you have flow first and foremost, and make sure that if you have, let's say, 10 athletes, you're able to have 3 athletes at per station.
Mm-hmm.
So just making sure that that flow can work, but also just say, hey, rest is good too. So we're trying to do everything that we can to be efficient with those timings. Does that make sense? So just make
Yeah.
sure that we're efficient with the amount of time that we have in that 15-minute block, and just make sure that we're getting the most out of it, but also giving those different muscle groups a rest.
Yeah.
And if we move on to that B block, just like we were mentioning before, we could do like a primary movement of upper body push, whether it's a bench press, vertical push, whatever that can be, like a shoulder press. And then we could pair that off with a core movement, whether that could be like a side plank or some kind of like Palloff press, or you could go more advanced and just advance those concepts. Depends on what your athletes are able to do. And then
Yeah.
pair that off with some kind of posterior chain movement,
Mm.
whether that's like a glute bridge, an RDL, getting that hinge pattern. And so you see how we're breaking off these movements and all these sessions, staying true to your principles of play, having a push, pull, hinge pattern, posterior chain, explosive movements, and just staying even throughout the day and just giving them as many as you can.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned a very important point of just choosing the exercises that give you the most bang for your buck. And I see a lot of young athletes, and this was certainly me as well, of we have limited amount of time and limited amount of sessions that we can do, considering that we also have sport training, we have games. So we need to be very efficient with the way we train. But sometimes you go ahead and just do like bicep curls and tricep extensions as a session, and it's like you're not doing the exercises that are giving you the most benefit for the limited amount of time and sessions that you have. So I think you mentioned a very important point of just trying to be very efficient with your exercise selection. And with those exercises, the strength ones, more specifically, like the push press, the bench press, the squat, the RDLs, how many reps and how many sets we're doing? Like, what are the variables on those exercises? Of course they may vary, but let's say you're in season working with these athletes, what type of variables are you using?
Great question, man. If it's in season, just like our volleyball girls are in right now, then keeping that rep scheme smaller. So maybe you could go as high as like 6s, but really staying within that rep range of like maybe 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s. But at the same time, a lot of these girls are really young. So they're around like U13 all the way to like U16, U17. So they also need to develop too. So we could give them a little bit more early on. And then once they get towards the end of their season, then we go for lower rep schemes. And so right now, what I really like to do is I like to make the movement bang for your buck and also just make the reps count. And so instead of prescribing like 15 reps, I like to go less reps and add a tempo, just like we talked about before with the push-up, adding a tempo, whether that could be 2 seconds down, 2-second pause, maybe 3 seconds. Time under tension, great principle of play that you can use, and then you can progressively overload that with putting a plate on your back, or you can add more time under tension.
Yeah.
Depends on what you want to do with that, but these are just some options that you could consider.
Yeah.
Just making sure that everything's good. And then as you move on from that tempo phase, then we could test them and see where they're at with how many push-ups can you actually do. Can you do a full chin up? If so, awesome. Now let's just continue to progress that and continue to go.
I see. So not just looking at the amount of reps that they're doing as the only progression variable, but then also the tempo that they use, because of course if you do the exercise slower, it's going to be harder. And then at the same time, as you mentioned before, you're working in that movement pattern and enhancing that movement pattern as well, right? Not just trying to load them as much as possible.
Yeah, you want to be intentional and smart with everything that you're doing from a loading perspective. It doesn't make any sense to me to move an athlete on to a barbell squat if they haven't earned that right. And that's something I've talked with Costa Telgadas in the tactical setting. And so when he works with his tactical athletes, he makes sure that those movements are looking crisp. By crisp, we're talking about full range of motion. This is something that at Temple that we talked about all the time. Full range of motion with your squats, full range of motion with everything that you're doing, because that full range of motion is really going to give you bang for your buck.
Yeah.
Of course, there's other tools and other principles that you will hit on where range of motion is not the objective. And if you're trained speed and power and you just want to do oscillatory objectives, like you're doing triphasic elements, then we have different conversations. But if we're talking about just developing the simple patterns of long-term athletic development, then yeah, we really want to emphasize full range of motion, because when I'm seeing some of these girls or males, whatever, and they're not really doing the movement fully or swiftly and in a good manner, then it's just wasting time. And we just need to make sure that they're getting after it. So
I think that's a great point that you mentioned, because I mean, a lot of young guys may have that misconception of, oh, I'm an athlete, therefore I should train fast. Therefore, I don't have to do slow tempo, full range of movement. So I'm just gonna do the, I don't know, push press without full range of motion, doing it very fast but very low technique. So you mentioned how they have to earn that right to do this power training, speed training. So who should do full range of motion, slow tempo, and who has earned the right to train that power and to perhaps not doing that full range of motion and not doing that slow tempo? Who should go into each bucket?
So in terms of training power, you could do it in many different ways. Just so that we are clear, even with our females that we have that are super young. So if we're going back to how we're structuring that block, we're still going to sprinkle in abilities for them to just go for jumps, go for doing explosive movements like a kettlebell swing or a push press, and you pair that off with a vertical jump or a horizontal broad jump. And so those are aspects of how you can train those elements, right? So just continue to sprinkle in as many as you possibly can and give them the right to continue to progress, but basically make it clear, all right, if you want to do a more advanced movement, then you need to make sure that you master these things super well, hold yourself to a very high standard. What I would say, in my opinion, one of the best coaches in our field that holds athletes to their highest standard, Joey Berglis, without a doubt. If you look up his social media and you look up all the things that he talks about with just having his athletes perform things super well, I think he's one of the best in the field. in terms of just making sure that they are achieving the movement in the best way possible. And he's looking at those details. The details always matter in terms of how they're landing, how they're moving, getting that full range of motion, elbows underneath for a squat. How are they jumping? Are they using those arms? Like, what are those strategies? Because we're always trying to make sure that they are progressing. And if you're owning those details, then you could really go far.
Yeah, definitely. And I think owning those details is even more important now at that young age, because then that's what's gonna determine how they move, like when they get older. And if you get those dialed in from the beginning, then you can start progressing into more strength and power earlier on, which I think is great. Now that we're talking about that younger age as well, there's a big component that happens, a big factor that happens at that age, and that is their growth spurt, their PHB. So I wanted to ask you, how do you adjust training considering the phase of their growth that they're at? Let's say a guy is in the growth spurt, and would you change anything about their training, the focus, or the variables?
Yeah, so something that we can talk about is just recording their peak height velocity. So this is just getting their standing height when they're sitting and measuring their weight. And then you can put those numbers into Science for Sport template that they have online. So you could do that just to get an idea of where they're at and take them with a grain of salt and just make an evaluation like, okay, where are they at with their growth? Are they about to reach that moment where they're going to go through a major growth spurt? And you just have awareness in the back of your mind. And if they're looking a little bit wonky with some of the movements, just slow it down. Instead of progressing, if we're going with a block periodization model, typically you can advance the movements every 4 to 6 weeks, go longer with that individual, just go longer. So like with the push press, for instance, what we can do is you can argue that, oh yeah, we could spend about 4 weeks with this, or you could spend even longer and just continue to adjust the reps over time and then progressively overload that, master the quality, because you have to make the evaluation. Have they truly mastered it, or are they just okay? And for me, I want to have that really high standard of they have to master it before I'm comfortable with going into the next one where they're doing a push jerk, and then we eventually do a dumbbell split jerk.
I see.
So we want to really hold everything to a high standard. It's a very simple movement, but very important to make sure that the standard is super high with moving on and graduating.
Yeah, and a lot of people may be asking themselves, okay, but why would I measure myself sitting? Just for everybody to understand, like, why this is important to determine the PHB that they're at. Why should athletes measure themselves sitting to get a good idea of it?
Because you want to isolate pretty much everything. So you want to basically get the trunk, you want to get the entire body. So you're basically getting like their trunk height. And so you basically have them sit on a 12-inch box and just keep a standard across the board. And then you just measure like head all the way down to the box, and you just make sure that you're measuring exactly how big their trunk is. So that's why we're basically isolating those variables. So measuring the trunk, but also measuring trunk plus the legs in terms of like, all right, where's their growth at, and putting those numbers, and gives us an idea of where they're at. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, not every, when you're developing, not everything grows at the same rate. So you want to make sure that like, of course, you want to see how tall you are, how, like, what's your height, but then also see the trunk to see what stage of its development is at. And you go, Matze.
Often in young age, like people like they grow very fast. So I've seen a lot of young guys, they don't handle like their own height, like, because they have to get used to it. Is there something they can do about it, like maybe more coordination, or what do you do with them?
Yeah, just like I mentioned before, just slow everything down, because they're going to have to relearn where their limbs are. And so by slowing it down, it's okay. So like if you're, let's just take this for example, a split squat. Split squats are very valuable. But at the same time, if they're struggling with their coordination, then you just say, hey, you probably remember that you had your foot a little bit further out in front. Now you need to make adjustments. You need to make sure that it feels right. Give them the principle. What are we aiming for with that split squat? Make sure we have a tall chest with it. Making sure we have our hips underneath us. Making sure that the hips are not going too far back. So it's just making sure that those principles, again, I always say principles because we don't want to just be in a box and just say, oh, the limb needs to be exactly this, 2 centimeters out in front. Make it really simple and just say, all right, get your knee underneath your hip, the back leg, and then just get that front leg in a position where you're able to get that full range of motion and make it look really good. If it doesn't look really good, then figure it out and make sure you put them in the best position to go. And this is something that, all right, in the back of our minds, if you realize that they're going through that period of rapid growth, then slowing it down and going for lighter weight is okay. Might hurt their ego at first, but that's okay. It's not going to be forever. It's just going to be temporary, but rather have that outcome instead of going through the worst possible situation of getting injured while doing those movements.
And I think if you, like you've always mentioned, that attention to detail and the important that it is. I think even more in this age, you have to be way more aware of the little details, because I mean, as you mentioned, these guys have an idea of how much space they're occupying, but that idea changed. Like they still have that idea, but their body is changing. So they might think, I don't know, they cover 1 meter when they do split squat, but then they cover a meter and 20 centimeters, you know? So that how much they're occupying, how much space they're occupying is changing, but they still have that idea on their mind of how it used to be before. So I just think that attention to detail, as you mentioned, is way more important here. And another aspect of, you mentioned how you do a lot of assessment. You want to make sure that you know where each athlete is at before you start training with them. What about body composition? Do you guys measure that? Do you guys try to optimize for that as well? Or is mostly skill development and movement development at this point?
Depends on every situation. So at SAPT, we make everything as individual as we possibly can. So we meet them where we're at. So if we need to get more of a body composition understanding, then we'll talk to them about outsourcing that and going to a place where we can get the best reading. If we want to send it for a DEXA scan, then we'll work with them to make sure that we get that analysis if that's what their goal is. If their goal is to get to about 10% body fat, this is going outside of team sport. We're talking about a general client population, an adult. We want to get to that. Okay, let's just get a better reading of where we're at if we don't have the skin fold calipers on hand and if we're not really good at that. So just having the ability of saying, all right, let's make sure we get really good objective data. That's if we want to go into that direction. But if we go back to team sport, we ultimately want to make sure that we're preparing them for performance goals. And if we need to have a conversation about, okay, we might need to change body composition a bit, take it day by day and talk about their daily habits of how are you recovering? How are you eating? Are you getting enough hydration? And just starting the conversation, have the parent involved too. And if you're having the parent involved too, and you're just educating them on the big overall picture, the principles, you can even talk to them about resources that are available online, but start with the general principles of play. How do we get some protein in? Because we can definitely agree that a lot of them don't get enough protein. So give them some options, like you can have a protein shake, a protein bar, or for vegan options, you could get vegan protein. Many different ways to replenish yourself. And precision nutrition is another great resource that you can guide them to in terms of how they do so well with breaking all that down.
Yeah. So basically, the main goal is performance, but then also understanding that part of that performance will come from as well their body composition. Let's say somebody has a very high BMI, then that's going to affect in some way how fast they can run. If they can lower that, then they might be able to run faster. So understanding also the impact that this body composition has in the performance, and then just starting off with the most basic things, and then just because there's no point on looking at how much magnesium you're taking if you don't take the right amount of protein, right? Just starting off with the basic stuff. And Mike, I had a question. This goes back to the strength part. Uh, Now we were talking more about like the growth and maturation stage, but going back to the strength part, there's a misconception, or I don't know if it's a misconception, especially in soccer players, that they shouldn't train strength, legs. Sorry. So, what do you think about this? And if so, if they have to train, how do you structure a leg training session, considering that they already putting so much stress in the legs?
Yeah, and this is a thing. So if you're training in season and you're in the academy setting, you're in the pro setting, wherever the case is, and this is something that I've seen in my past too. So you could take that into consideration, and you really have to make sure that you understand the overall game structure and the training structure. So break it down by match day -4, 3, 2, 1. And so back when I was at FC Cincinnati, on our -4, we were doing a total body approach and doing compound movements because that we could really get after it on those days. And then on the -2, doing more accessory movements. So that's just like talking about the gym elements. And so further away we were from match day, we were comfortable going for things like a trap bar deadlift and keeping the rep schemes reasonable where they're not getting too sore and just making sure that they were fresh and ready to go.
I see. I
So,
see.
but
So
every academy setting is going to be different. It just depends on how many how many opportunities they have and what their constraints are in their environment. So different academies might have different schedules, different opportunities to get a good training session in. So if they have more availability, then maybe they can go 3 days in the gym and they could break that off a bit better. Maybe they could go a -4, they could go for strength and power development. Maybe -3, they could go for eccentric strength, where they're doing like RDLs, pairing that off with the -3 being volume and bigger session play. And then on that -2, accessories and train for that speed
yeah.
and power. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. So not just because we always think like, oh, when you do legs, you end up being very sore and you have to put a lot of volume to it. But just being aware of when you do it and how much you do it. So trying to put it as far as possible from the game. In this case, match day -4 if possible, and trying to keep the reps low and but very high intent. So you're not fatiguing the muscle, but then at least you're putting some work in there. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah. And find opportunities to continue to progress, microdose, all those certain elements.
I see.
And you talk about the residual effects. So we need to train speed once a week in terms of talking about touching on max strength, whether that's a 3-rep max, touch upon that once a month, roughly, or once every 2 to 3 weeks. So just thinking about like how all of that comes into play. So
Definitely. And Mike, this has been just a great journey on just how an athlete should train outside of their team sessions, outside of the field, because it is like as you said at the beginning of the episode, and this is something that we've based on the whole podcast. It is very important to have this pace in which you develop things like strength, speed, agility, things that because of how efficient you want to be with your training, you might not have the time or the equipment or resources to do it on the field. So it's always important, especially for a young athlete that still has to dial in these movements, to have this pace in which they develop all these different things. So I just think you ran us through all the different aspects of it, and we got a very good understanding of how a young athlete should train. So I really appreciate just you sharing all this experience and knowledge, because it's really helpful not only for us, but I'm sure to everybody watching it. Do you have anything else, Matze, before we go to the rapid fire?
I really appreciate it so far. I think it's also very admiring the details you put into the guys, like not letting them go to the next exercise. I can imagine some guys are like, oh, I want to do the stuff the other guys are doing, but in the end, it's gonna help them on the long term, building like the good foundations with good technique.
When
Yeah.
you're keeping
And
them,
I have one more question. When we talked about the testing phase,
Yeah.
like it was also have like, I don't know, like for mobility, let's say hamstring stretch, you have to have your hands on the floor, something like this, something like people or like a viewer can see like if he's on a good level.
you're talking about range of motion, or
So like how can someone like test the mobility? Which exercise would you recommend?
so we could do something as simple as ankle range of motion. So what you can do is you can basically measure out, get a tape measure, and see, let's just say you have a wall, right? You're in a half kneel position. Let's just see how far over you can get your knee over your toe, where the knee can touch the wall. And so the further away the foot is, then you can see where their ankle range of motion is, and then measure out how much that distance is. You can also do a sit and reach test. Honestly, most of our guys and girls not very flexible, so we have interventions real quick that, all right, you need to be really focusing on your ability to move, because the more availability that you have through range of motion, the better. And this is why talking about full range of motion is just so critical. In sport, we just want to give them as many options as they possibly can. And if sometimes they're going to need to get in a deep range of motion, the deeper you could go, like athletes like Michael Jordan, for instance, or Kobe, they had the ability to just get down low, do some crazy acrobatic events. And if they have those movement availabilities, those movement options, then they could do anything really well. And so this is why we talk about the opportunities for getting the best movement possible. So hopefully that
Great.
answers your question.
Perfect answer. I think often it's underestimated how important the mobility is.
Definitely. They want to get straight to the squatting and the bench press, but yeah, you first have to get those movements dialed in. And Mike, now let's get to the rapid fire questions. I'm gonna ask you for you to do some hot takes here on strength and condition, maybe bust some myths. So, are agility ladders actually useful or just for a show?
What a question. They have their place for sure. So in terms of, let's just break this down further. So you can bring them out every now and then to just focus on like whatever. You can go through coordination. You can use it as a tool to have fun, right? You can focus on like coordination and all of that. But if we're talking about the definition of change of direction and agility, no. We all know that change of direction is talking about predetermined paths that they have to take. So run to this cone, stop at this cone. Agility, have to react to your environment. What's a ladder doing? It's a tool that is, you're in boxes. And so that's not agility training. So in terms of calling it an agility ladder, maybe you want to call it just a ladder instead. Maybe a food for thought. That's a hot take, maybe, but that's just where I would go with it. So a ladder, you can use it as a good tool for sure. If you want to go for like extensive plyometric development in terms of like lower contacts, quick movements, definitely could be a nice tool. Teach them some coordination, because some of them, all right, you're seeing that they can't really move too well yet, but bring it out and change it up sometimes.
I see.
Okay, great. And what is your opinion on long distance running for soccer players?
Has its place for sure. So if we're talking about off-season training, then sometimes you got to change it up and go for tempo running, or sometimes you got to build up the engine in different ways. But you pretty much get where I'm going, right? If we're just talking about running 4 or 6 miles straight, are we doing that in soccer? No. So mixing and blending in different tools and variations, making sure that we're training repeat sprint ability, making sure that we're training maximal aerobic speed, and then blending in some tempo running too. It depends on what your training schedule is and if they're training soccer outside of your off-season period. So it all depends on what their schedule is outside. But let's say that they're not playing for a club team. All right, then we got to make sure that we touch on. Let's talk about the percentage range. Actually, this is really important. So with the Charlie Francis book, talk about the overall percentages. So anywhere between 74 and 95%. That's pretty much that range where team sport activities will occur, right? And 95 to 100%, that's like maximum speed. Anywhere between 74% and below, that would be like a considered tempo running, right? So those are typically those thresholds that we would want to live in terms of if they are training with their team, then we'd want to stay within tempo running or maximum speed, depending on how much time you have with them. So going to the extreme, so very high or very low, so high-low method. And so what you could do with prescribing tempos is you can just prescribe them with the distances and measure out what those volumes could look like with in specificity with their sport, what that ultimately looks like. You can do many different variations, whether it's just like change of direction one, just a straight line run with tempo running, or if we're just talking about developing the robustness of speed, giving them quality reps, making sure that they're actually running 95% and above of their actual speed.
I see.
But if they're not training soccer at that moment, and maybe they're not training with their club, then all right, we need to probably touch upon that too. But it all depends on if that bucket is being filled with the time that they're spending. Let's say that they're training twice a week with another club team. Maybe we don't need to touch on 74 to 94% of that top end speed. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah. So like if they're not having the volume in like sport training, let's say they're not training with a team, then you might want to touch on that 75 to 95%, that where like the intensity that most sports, team sports happen. So just to get that volume. But then if they're doing it, then you're just trying to be either on that tempo range or in that maximum speed range. Is that how, like a good way to put it?
We just want to make sure that the buckets are being filled.
Yeah.
And so, and it all goes back to the beginning of the conversation. How much time do you have with them realistically? So if we have more time, awesome. Then we can fill up more buckets. We only have so much time that you have to choose which ones are the most important buckets to fill. So we're going back to the conversation of, with my situation currently, have about 60 minutes. And so what's going to give us the most bang for our buck currently with like volleyball athletes, if we have them twice a week, in our professional opinion, we want to go for developing strength, power, speed, and teach them how to move well. And then since they're training volleyball outside of the facility, then they can take care of making sure they can actually rally and make sure that they're winning games, and then we can just develop their ability to jump, sprint, et cetera, et cetera.
Makes sense. And Mike, what is the most overrated exercise that you see young athletes do?
Say burpee. I hate burpees.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Call them like up downs, but burpee. Mike Boyle definitely says it on his social media pretty often, and even my fiance hates them. Yeah, sure. You can have, there's a time and place for them, but at the same time, risk reward ratio with it. Also, like, nobody likes it, so I'm not going to put it in my program. Yeah, but that's just me. No one likes a burpee.
It just brings compliance like down the hill.
Yeah, I don't like to have exercise as punishment, and so a lot of times that's just like, okay, we're going to punish them by giving them burpees. So
yeah, everybody has a bad perspective about burpees.
Yeah,
I'm gonna send that clip to my coach. So no more burpees. Mike, what do you think about training to failure for athletes?
Say that once more.
what do you think about training to failure for athletes? In which case you think it's useful, in which case it's not useful?
Failure is an amazing tool. Failure is such a great tool. It makes you realize where you're at, and if you can do it in a safe manner, awesome. Obviously, if you're having them fail and their technique is just looking horrible, and they're rounding their back if they're doing a deadlift, if they're just looking terrible all around, then yeah, you gotta cut it. But if it's safe and you're doing it in a good manner, great. Let's take them to let's have them reach their limits, but doing it in a safe and smart way. So like a chin up or a pull up, as long as it's looking good and the movement quality is not being compromised to a certain degree where they're going to get injured, awesome. There's a time and place for all of those different aspects of training. And so like using calisthenics like push-ups, pull-ups, or a goblet squat. So, it depends on what you want to do. Do we want to go like all the way to 20 reps? Not really, but that's why I like to prescribe like a 3-rep max. Sometimes you will hit failure. That's part of training. That's okay. Because if you like, okay, let's talk about if you got your athletes to do like a clean, for instance, sometimes you're going to fail, and that's just another tool, right? Don't necessarily need to use a clean as a tool, but if you're going after like a 1-rep max or going after a number you've never hit and you fail, not the worst thing in the world. You just know where you're at.
I see. And because people might think failure is when you physically cannot do it anymore, but it's actually when the break forms. That's when failure hits. Not because there's no point in just doing a squat like at some point that it's not even a squat anymore. You have your back arc, like that's where you reach the injury. But when the form breaks, that's actually when you hit failure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like that you added that you don't have to do 20 reps to see your failure. You can just increase the weight and get there faster.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And Mike, ice baths, what do you think about them?
So let's talk about a graphic that our facility just posted. So this came from the NSCA CPSS book. And so we talk about the pyramid of recovery and how an athlete can optimize all those different things. So ice baths, that's like pretty much in the middle of that pyramid. So bottom, foundation, sleep and downtime. Got to make sure that you hone in on that first. We would probably agree that we can do even better with this, optimizing this. If you get a good amount of sleep and it's adequate, then your recovery gains are going to be substantial and great.
And it's free.
It's free, exactly. And time is your most important asset. So you got to make sure that we get the best amount of sleep possible. And you're also relaxing. This is something that I could do better with. Relaxing, taking a chill pill, and just making sure that you get some time to just relax, watch a movie, whatever you like to do, YouTube, Netflix, making sure that you're having a good time. And then that second part of the pyramid, nutrition, hydration. So hitting on those principles of making sure that you're on top of your macronutrients, getting a lot of water, which most people don't get nowadays. They think they're drinking enough, but not nearly enough, especially if they're doing team sport activities. And then we could touch on different things like compression, hot and cold contrast, water, different variables and different considerations like that. But those different contrast water activities, they don't matter as much if your sleep and downtime and your nutrition hydration aren't solid. So just got to make sure that you hit on those first. But yeah, I think it's a great tool. If it makes your RPE, your rate of perceived exertion, lower and it makes you feel good, awesome. Let's use it as a tool.
Great. I think it comes back to everything we've been talking about. Has come from the point of we first have to have some things dialed in before we go to the other areas. So we first have to make sure that we're doing the right movement pattern in order to then go for strength or power. We first have to make sure that we're sleeping well if we actually want to see the effects of the ice bath, right?
Exactly.
Perfect.
Do you think an athlete should train core if they do heavy lifts already,
An athlete should do
like
what?
deadlift? What if the athlete should train core if they do heavy deadlifts or squat?
Yeah, time and place for everything.
Yeah.
If you have the availability to do it, then yeah, core training is essential. So you could break it down into many different ways, but do it intentionally, right? We talked about earlier, like, oh, you could do a side plank or you could do a regular plank or whatever the case is, a pull-off press, but be intentional with it. If you find that they're really not getting engagement with it, spruce it up and make it more engaging, overload it a bit more. Maybe you could do a cable pull through, or you could do something more explosive like a rotational medicine ball throw, just things like that. There are so many different ways to train the core. And this is something that I've talked about with Coach Logan Neff in Cincinnati and how he trains his athletes in the high school setting with train core, train it with like good rotations, with the throws that he has his athletes do. You can also do loaded carries, so those farmer carries. But again, don't want to just do it like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go for a walk and there and back, right? Do it with really good intent.
Yeah.
Coach them and teach them like have that dumbbell away from your body. Just teach them like keep the arm stiff and cue them on not really bracing that core, but just bracing externally. So squeezing that glute, squeezing that external arm, and just creating stability like that. That's something I learned from Cal back when I was at Minnesota. Cue externally instead of just bracing that core and just constricting yourself like that. Create stability from the outside, and then you would be surprised. You'll create stability from everywhere else because those muscles on the outside create inner strength.
So you want to brace externally when you're doing a firmness carry. It's something for me to keep in mind as well. Mike, I imagine you have a lot of kids that come with you with wearable tech, like now with these new Whoop bands, Apple Watch, and all of this. What are your thoughts on it?
I mean, my fiance just got an Aura ring, right? So it just gives you some more data, gives you some more things to think about. But at the same time, just like we mentioned before, if those things are taken care of from the foundation, awesome. We could get some more data collected and just give us a better understanding of where the person's at, especially if they're wearing a heart rate monitor, the Aura ring. We have some more data to collect, then we can just take a little bit of a deeper look and just get more objective data. So I'm all about those tools for sure.
Definitely.
Perfect. And Mike, what do you think? Should athletes train on machines? Very general question.
It's a tool, 100%. But going back to what we talked about earlier, if you don't have flow, you don't got anything. So you got to make sure that the flow of the room fits in whatever you can do. So if you have like a glute ham raise, then making sure that you have more than just one. So if you're just programming in like, let's just say a belt squat, if you have one belt squat and you have 20 athletes, it's going to be tough to get everybody on it and getting them 3 sets if you have 15 minutes. So you just got to think like, all right, if we have more than one, we have like 3 to 4, that we can make it work. And then we just throw in some other exercises. So just making sure that you have the availability and the bandwidth of just making sure that you can use the machines as a good tool, but love machines. As adults, especially myself approaching 30 years old, I am growing to appreciate machines even more. So because it can really give you the ability to be safe and also just overload it even more.
Yeah.
And, Rob Gronkowski, for instance, he just talked about the other day on his social media, just saw this social media post where he said, I never did a back squat.
Oh, really?
Because he had back issues. So there's a thing, if you're just telling the athlete like, oh, you have to do back squat or oh, you can't do anything, you're just living inside a box. You got to have options. So a belt squat, it's great because you're just eliminating that lumbar load and you can do something else instead that can really load their legs up even more or really go for a deeper range of motion. So, and you can load that great or you could go a safety bar, squat instead. So many different ways to get after it. So those are just examples.
Yeah, I think it makes more important now what you've always mentioned of keeping the principles in mind, because when you have the principles, like, okay, what you look at, what do we want to achieve, what constraints we're working with. In this case, it might be the back issues, right? And then then it allows you to see what's the most optimal thing to do. Instead, when you're like, no, athletes have to do back squats, then you might end up injuring your player, and it might have the other effect of what you want. So I just wanted to emphasize again on like that point of principles that you mentioned. I just think it's really important to not be so into a box, and just think of different options to get the same result. And Mike, if you could leave one piece of, I mean, you've talked about very valuable things, but if you can leave one piece of advice to every young athlete watching the podcast, which one would it be?
So if it's young athlete, young coach, whatever the case can be, make the big time where you're at and do the little things right. So making the big time where you're at, be the thermostat of the room. That's something that I want to live by every single day. So when I enter the room, I want to make sure that when they're walking in, I'm making sure that it's the best part of their day. That's the standard that I want to hold myself to, and that they're going to get better. And then the little things right. So people that receive promotions, it's not because they're doing something super special at first. They're doing the little things right, like how they present themselves when they walk in. Do they have their shirt tucked in? You don't necessarily need the shirt tucked in, but do you look really good? Do you look presentable? The other thing is showing up early. If you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. This is a big lesson that young athletes and young professionals, I think, need to do better with.
Yeah.
If as soon as they learn that lesson and they really hone in on that, great. Then they've basically bought more time to just get themselves situated with doing little things to prepare for the session or prepare for their day at work. And yeah, it just goes back to like just continuing to make the big time where you're at and make the most of your time. So time is your most valuable asset. So make the most of your time and be present. Be present is one of the last things too. Sometimes, a lot of times, is the fact that we have a lot of thoughts in our head and there's external things that we're thinking about outside of work. We all have personal things that we're dealing with, but being present in the moment and just delivering the best that you can, whether you're the athlete going through the session or you're the coach delivering the session, be present and just live in the moment instead of just like, oh, I got to return my text message and return my Snapchat. Be as present as you possibly can.
Definitely, man. I think you just mentioned so many valuable things, starting off with the point of just that attention to detail. I think it was Steve Jobs that said that he didn't have any specific talent for seeing what was the best product or to create the best product. He just cared more about the details. And sometimes you don't have to be like more talented. You don't have to be smarter. You just have to be more aware of those details, of being late, being on time, of preparing before an interview, of preparing before a meeting, like just taking the time and caring about those little things that would actually make the result better. And on that last point on being present, I wanted to point out something about you that I found very interesting, that you recall every person that you had the conversation with, every person that taught you like specific principle or a specific technique. And I just found it very admiring, because that shows how present you are in those moments, that you can recall the specific moment in which you learned it. And that's definitely something that I'll try to apply more for me. So apart from that, man, I really appreciate you just sharing all this valuable knowledge and experience to us, because we definitely got to learn a lot, and we hope everybody watching it got to learn as well, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, not a problem. It's been an awesome conversation. Really great start to the morning, and I hope that you all got a lot out of this. And if you all need to reach out to me, please do so at my email at mike@coachmike.com. coachmbrown.com, or you can give me a follow on Instagram at coachmbrown. And this is something that I'll do for sure. If you shoot me a DM, you shoot me an email, I'll get back to you for sure. And let's start a conversation.
That's great, man. That's great. I hope everybody will appreciate it. But yeah, man.
Like I really love the podcast as well. A lot of value. And like Camilo said, like you remember everyone you talked to, and also like all the studies, all the books you read, just shows how much effort you put into your work and your job.
Mike, it's been a pleasure, man. It's been a pleasure. Hope you'd speak to you soon.
Appreciate it, guys. Have a good one.
Yeah,
And I'll see you all later. Thank you.